Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today, A Potent Cybersecurity Combination, Threat Modeling and Vulnerability Management, with hacker, enterprise security MVP, and named by SC Magazine as one of the top women to watch in security, Paula Januszkiewicz. We're super excited to have her here. You're also joined by Beyond Trust Principal Sales Engineer Jerome Diggs, who will run us through an overview and demo of Beyond Trust Enterprise Vulnerability Management Solution Retina after Paula's portion, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. A kind reminder to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we will cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. So anytime you have a question, just pop it on in, and I will be monitoring those throughout the webinar. Also, today's session is being recorded. You'll receive a follow-up email containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now. The slides can also be immediately downloaded via the handout section in the GoToWebinar console. You should find that on the right side of your screen. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Paula to the line. Hello, Paula. Ready to dive right in with you. Let's do it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah, and welcome everybody on the webinar, which is hosted, of course, by Beyond Trust, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. A couple of words about myself, a couple of words regarding introduction, and then a bunch of subjects of what we're going to be talking about. Today it's a very interesting day because we are discussing things like threat modeling, vulnerability management, going through different types of vulnerabilities, and checking out how eventually you are able to spot those. So it's going to be purely related with some scanning, searching for what kind of issues we've got in operating system and how we are able to exploit them. So very interesting, very practical as well. Let's do the deep dive into the subject. So, well, as you see, what do I do for a living? I do deliver penetration tests. I'm also a CEO of the company, which is called Secure, and basically what we deliver are high-quality cybersecurity services. I also have a chance to speak at the conferences like you've seen before, Black Hat. Also, I'm going to be at Black Hat 2018 in Vegas, also Microsoft Ignite, and a couple of other ones delivering keynotes as well. And my team and myself, we do lots of security research. And what I just want to say is that there's always something interesting to cover in cybersecurity field, and vulnerability management is definitely something that everybody is interested in, and there are a couple of approaches we can take. So just one more thing, if you are interested in the quiz, which is absolutely free, no registration, etc., pure knowledge, this is what we always talk about. Then basically you can check out our website and fill out the quiz, and the average score is 15 still. We have a couple of thousands of people that answered the quiz, so you will see pretty much how many points you've got within the average. So let's begin. So basically, whenever we are thinking about the enterprise vulnerability management, or in general security within the enterprise, there's a couple of things to pay attention to. First of all, we've got procedures, and this is pretty much everything that arranges our security, especially with the GDPR coming in Europe, which affects also pretty much the whole world, and different companies in the United States, etc. We will need to have lots of different types of procedures that document and pretty much control every types of steps we do within the organization while we are processing the personally identifiable information. So that's why vulnerability management comes to place, and it has to happen because it's going to be required by law at the end of May 2018. So what I'm saying is that of course we do have different types of security policies, and I put over here we follow, because eventually we've been taking part in different types of projects where customers actually had a security policy in place, but nobody was really not only updating it but also following it. So it cannot be long, it has to be short, and it has to be also practical. And that's why it's maybe easy to say but at the same time I will give you a little bit of statistics in a second to check on how these particular policies can affect the organization. Also, these policies affect different types of regulations of how do we train people. So if we do have, for example, employees and we want to implement for them different types of security awareness programs, maybe within the policies we're able to specify what will be the policy for programs like that. And for example, once a year, every type of employee needs to go through the quiz and answer a bunch of questions and pass that quiz, which technically is related with security. One of our departments, one of our customers and within the departments of security, they had a very good idea, for example, that every single time after they completed the security awareness training, then for a month they were walking around and they were sticking the post-it card, post-it note into the screen for every type of a screen that was not locked for the break. So if they were just like walking around randomly and if they spotted that there is someone not locking their desktop after the security training, they put the card like that, which was saying something like please lock your desktop, you're carrying IT security department, which is a pretty good idea because how many times you can have this posted card. It's a little bit of a public shaming thing maybe, but that worked very nicely because it was lots of fun and everybody remembered, and that's the most important thing. Also things like, of course, password length or password strength. Sometimes, well, especially within the NIST 863B, we've got different types of requirements within the companies that passwords should be at least 8 characters long, etc., etc. Well, if we do have a look at the the recommendation, we should say, then we no longer need to maintain the password change. We need to make sure that our password is secure. And that's the biggest priority over here, because from every pen tester / hacker's perspective, if this person gets into the infrastructure, what's really the probability that I'm going to guess this password? It's none. Now, if it's complex or, let's say, strong, then, for example, when we are implementing a SMB relay attack or any type of a NTLM version 2 authentication cracking, then of course the stronger the password is, the better, yes? And the same story applies, for example, for data protection API while protecting the local secrets. Well, we rely on the SHA-1, not of MD4, not the regular hash, but the SHA-1, which is also hash, but SHA-1 of the user's password. So the stronger the password is, the better, and this is really what makes sense. So these procedures needs to be applicable, of course, interesting at the same time, and followed by maybe implementing some kind of a security awareness programs. Who knows? Now, the second part, which covers the security in the enterprise, is related with the vulnerability management. And vulnerability management, it's a kind of funny process, because quite oftenly while we talk to different types of customers, and I'm saying this from the perspective of someone who works in the consultancy business, then basically we can hear from potential customers that, oh, no, we don't want a pen test, or we don't want a security review or something, because we do already a vulnerability management and we do have like some kind of a software that does this. That's great, but we need to always remember that that's not enough, because it is important to also know different types of dependencies in between different systems, yeah? And this is something that I would like to show you today. And one of the good examples that I'm giving over here, it's, okay, if we do this type of vulnerability management and we just check if things are up to date, etc., not really check for the misconfiguration, then if, for example, someone is no longer working in IT in a team because, I don't know, this person was fired, disciplinary, or any other way, then basically what is really the situation? Do we change the password of, for example, SQL Server? And I'm giving this example because while we don't do that, then of course there is no like a built-in Windows mechanism that allows us to analyze if these passwords were changed or if service accounts passwords were changed, etc. Yeah? So this is something that is a very nice process, but it has to be supplemented by the insecure configuration management, and that's what I'm putting over here as a part number 3. And these kind of different types of explanations, examples, we're gonna also discuss during this presentation. So I would like to show you what are the very famous areas within the operating system, how you are able to spot something, extract something, etc., while it's not really considered as a vulnerability, but it's considered as a misconfiguration, and that misconfiguration could lead into potential problems. Yeah, so quite often misconfiguration can be more escalated inside, like when someone already has an access somewhere, then we are able to extract some data, blah, blah, blah. So, but this is something that we definitely shouldn't ignore, and this is what I wanted to, discuss. This is what I wanted to discuss during the webinar. Now, just to give you a little bit of a clue of this insecure configuration management, because that's quite interesting. We've got a customer which is in the medical area. It's actually a hospital, and for the first time while we were establishing a cooperation with this particular customer, what happened is that the first pen test was actually quite sad, yeah, because we managed to get access pretty much immediately. And what I did, and I was the one delivering that, before getting into the customer side, decided to check into a kiosk, which normally patients use for registering for a doctor's visit. So you put the name on it, and there is like a number that prints out, and then you're in the line. Yeah, fantastic. So that, unfortunately, kiosk had a keyboard, so I was able to work on it a little bit, and what appeared that account that was running this application for registration within the kiosk was actually running a local administrator. And so we could be like, yeah, okay, that's really horrible, and I totally agree, but what is the problem is that that's this insecure configuration. And so that's spotted. What allowed me to do is to extract the hashes, of course, and I performed a pass the hash attack amongst all the other machines, and I tried to do that, and you would normally expect that this machine would not be a member of the domain. Unfortunately, it was, and I was a user that was a local administrator on that box, and I was able to move forward to the other eventually servers, including file server, when I was able to find a web config file, which is actually so easy that it's even shameful to mention that that's the way I get in. Oh my god, like that's really too simple. Yeah, so it shouldn't even make the story. But eventually what happened is that I was able to get to one of the servers. There was a web config, as I mentioned. There was an SA account logon for the SQL server. Then I managed to move forward from there and perform the memory dump, extracted some credentials, and with the passy hash and lots of data and local administrator on the kiosk app and so on, I was able to become a domain admin, and that was actually quite funny. So this is what we mean by the security in the enterprise. It consists of these 3 things. So the procedures, the vulnerability management, and insecure configuration management, and each of these 3, they supplement each other, and security in the enterprise cannot really exist without that. And we are talking here, of course, only technical approach in terms of for the vulnerability management, as we were discussing on the presentation. There are also a couple of other things like skills of the team, etc., but that's something else and not the technical, and we will not focus on it right now. So whenever we are thinking about some stats, and that's actually quite funny, you've got, and what is interesting is this 87% of companies. Now, it's just a number, yes, but we can imagine easily that in general, 87% businesses that were breached, they did not have a security policy in place. It could be considered as a little bit of an artificial statistic, but on the other hand, it also shows the importance that the security policy should be there. Though maybe if there was like 100% of overall companies in this world hacked, maybe it will be still, of course, 87% that they don't have it, but the rest that were not hacked, they still don't have a security policy, but they were fine, they run away with the hack. So yeah, so in general, what's the point is that we've got procedures, and these procedures can help us, and even though they're going to decrease this percentage of companies being hacked, then it's already some part of the success that we can we can price over here. Anyway, so whenever we're thinking about the vulnerability management, yeah, so just a couple of words regarding that. So first of all, what is not a vulnerability management? It's not a penetration test. It's a different thing. Vulnerability management is a process that we launch within the organization in order to make sure that we maintain the, well, first of all, low-hanging fruits, that's for sure. So anything that is not up to date, etc. And at the same time, we're able to react to different types of ad hoc, hot, zero-day situations. Yeah? So if, for example, there's a vulnerability in some kind of a network device system, then basically you are able to spot that very quickly with the management tool. And if you are performing the pen test then once a year, then of course you will not be. So one process definitely complements the other one. Penetration test allows you to spot the dependencies in between different systems, etc. Play with the network traffic maybe a little bit, play with users, maybe rely on a simple user passwords, monitor anti-alert version 2 traffic, try to perform the SMB relay. That's the thing. Vulnerability management is a little different. It allows us to spot, of course, what is not up to date. So this is a little bit of a summary of what we've got within this process, yeah? So what we are saying is that vulnerability management should be, of course, a part of the continuous cycle. So there is and could be a red team and a blue team, and the blue team's job, or just a security department, is to, of course, discover different types of issues, report, so we are able to spot of what's going on. Eventually we are handling the situation and passing that information to IT team for fixing different issues. Prioritization, and that is pretty much related with the vulnerability management. If there are many, we need to make a decision of which one is the most important one, and it's not only because this one is critical. It might be critical, but it might not affect any of the systems, so maybe that will actually get a lower priority. Who prioritizes this is, of course, business. So if there is a possible to exploit vulnerability in one of the systems that are business-oriented, then obviously it's going to be our priority. And the response, which means patching, fixing, etc. Yeah? So whenever we are thinking, of course, about the different types of steps further, yeah? So if we're thinking about, okay, vulnerability management, that's one thing. But the second thing, is there anything interesting around infrastructure that we should pay attention to that eventually vulnerability management will not cover? Yeah? And answer is, of course there is. So what we did, we prepared for you a top 13 to the infrastructure security list. Yeah, so that is pretty much related with a whole environment. Vulnerability management is one thing, but the second thing is, okay, like if we have that part done, then great. Vulnerability management is still a very important process because things can be vulnerable at some point, but these steps absolutely they need to be completed to make sure that we've got idyllic security within our infrastructure, which maybe not 100% is possible, but we can get close to that. So things like offline access, yeah. So anything which is related with the disk encryption, anything that is related with the possibility to grab the machine, boot it from the whatever USB drive, and then become a local administrator, for example, or be able to extract some user secrets, or for example extract the hashes database so that we are able to crack it and then eventually get access to some of the other secrets. Yeah? So this is what we are referring to. Now we've got a couple of other things, and point number 2, it's quite important, and we're going to also cover that in the practical details because I do have, as usual, for you a lot of demonstration, but let's cover this important part first. So things like code execution. So every single time there is some kind of a vulnerability, it doesn't mean that we're going to execute the code this way, but it could be that way too. So that basically every single time exploitation happens, then we're running the code that, for example, we don't know. And we've got a blocker, device guard from Microsoft, etc., Carbon Black, things like that, which are the solutions that are allowing us to block certain type of a software. But what matters, of course, is how do we manage that particular software. So management matters over here. And here we are able to run only the code that we know. Yeah? And for example, Retina, which you're going to be hearing after my presentation, which is a great software, will allow you, for example, to spot of what kind of things are running, like services, etc., on different types of machines. So this is also in that context. Things like log centralization. So that is quite interesting because who really does this? Like, nobody really does until we find a person that can actually sit and review these logs. And when we are thinking about different types of log centralizing solutions, then that makes sense. But of course, we need to make a use of it, yeah. And as long as you do that, awesome. Then you've got that point covered. But I can tell you that our experience amongst different types of customers is that companies, they rather don't do that. Yes, on the servers, maybe they have like some monitoring software, but not necessarily collecting logs. Question is, do we really have to do that? And the answer is, not really. We need to know what we want to collect. So for example, if we do have sysmon, then maybe we should just build some kind of filters and be able to collect information of what was executing on a certain types of machines. Was there any like create remote threat or raw access to the disk happening, or maybe there was like some kind of a network connection happening. So depends, of course, on what is interesting for you, but that is one of these points that can help security for sure. Things like maintenance and reviewing, yes, different types of configuration details. So maintenance, of course, backup and making sure that everything can work in a case of a failure. But review, this is quite interesting part, because what we mean by this, it's the possibility to review different types of services that are across the or amongst the different types of servers. Yeah? So for example, we do have a service that is running on a service account, and that service account has password never expiring. Okay, let's say hypothetically that it's fine, but eventually what happens is that that password is simple, or eventually that password is extracted because normally that password is stored within a registry. So we need to know, of course, what are those misconfigurations out there, and that's one of the first steps that needs to happen within the organization. So what kind of services do we have, on what kind of accounts do they run? That these are the like basics, and of course at the very end how we are able to mitigate it. And then for that purpose we've got things like GMSAs. So we need to make sure that we can handle that, and eventually all the services, or most of the services, we run on GMSAs. You need to remember about the support. Not every third-party application supports GMSAs, but that's something that you can check as well by yourself. Okay, so another part we've got so the client protection. Yeah, so different types of anti-exploit solutions. One thing is, again, vulnerability management. That's another part that covers the possibility to maintain the issues that are related with the vulnerabilities to be exploited, because vulnerability management means, or we could define it in many ways, but eventually analyzing as well if things are up to date or not, yes? But that vulnerability could be a 0 day, so how do you react to that? And what you need to make sure that you got is the anti-exploitation solution, so that if there is a vulnerability, that piece of code cannot execute in a certain way, and this is what we are really fighting for. So current anti-malware options for Windows 10, for example, and not only involve machine learning, but also the platform security is pretty nice. For example, one of the things that you have, and that's like blocking, for example, execution of macros within the Windows, just because it's a built-in feature, just because we are not allowing the child process to run to be a child process of the process parent of the office. Yeah, so that's like a behavior that 100% will show that this is actually macro that is trying to, for example, encrypt our drive. And having that in mind, that's really what is kind of a vulnerability management, but we are not really discussing here vulnerability, it's a situation. So that's something that we could classify under the misconfiguration. And eventually, things like managing local admins accounts, that's very simple. Things like security awareness program, that's what we mentioned, so that the users, then they don't perform different types of activities. Quite important, actually, we have a very nice customer, which is a bank. And that particular customer, well, they got an email. The email was well targeted because it was an email with the attachment, please pay an invoice, we all know that, which contained ransomware, which was a 0-day, which came through. But users before that part, they had a security awareness training, and when they got an email, all the admins, they were like, oh my gosh, so now we are in trouble because we don't have anything really that will block that. But users didn't really open it because they were on the security awareness program and they were not expecting such emails. Everybody was really shocked that it actually worked. So it made a story over there. Now, things like security configuration wizard, yeah, so limitation of the different types of surfaces for security or insecurity on the servers. Yeah, so if I don't, if I'm not using a spooler service on the servers, then why do we still have it running? And that's like a very classic example because every server has a spooler running, and why? It's just like not only we're using or overusing the resources, but it also shows the or expands the surface for the attack. Things like scoping, of course, role management, which is clearly related with the privilege access management, and that's something that is also applying over here as one of the solutions for the vulnerability management, so that only certain type of account can log on only to certain places, in short words. Things like network segmentation, so that we are able to maintain the spoofing, sniffing / spoofing attacks. Things like SMB relay. Well, this will not really 100% help us to mitigate it, but if we add SMB signing to on the top of that, then we got this. And what I'm trying to say over here, that that's not really a vulnerability. It's something that is an insecure configuration, and that's why we put all these points, so that you guys have that list and eventually you are able to refer to that part. Yeah? So what are these areas to put the security on? Things like data protection, of course, so that when it leaks, it does not really leak, it doesn't leak information, but only file. And of course, different types of periodical configuration reviews in order to maintain this vulnerability management process by performing security review or any type of analysis within the environment. Yeah, so these are the 13 steps that we're having a look at in security of the organization, additionally to the process of the vulnerability management. Okay, guys, so I choose couple of spots, couple of interesting points that are worth having a look at that are related with the vulnerability management. I would like to give you right now a bunch of examples of how vulnerabilities or how they may look like eventually and how we are able to exploit them, and then we could discuss, of course, what we could do later. So one thing is that installing different types of updates and making sure that we are up to date, but another part, it's related with code execution prevention, and I'm going to be back with this slide a little bit. That's this point number 2, implementation of the process execution prevention, and that's really something that has to happen. It's like we call it a new black. So this is like a new fashionable color out there because for the past 5 years we've been targeted by ransomware, so it's really time to do that. But even so, with some companies that process is still not mitigated well, and this is something that I would like to show you. The vulnerability that I will show you, it's already patched in Windows, but I'm using this to show you the concept of it because it's really interesting. So forgive me, you will never see the outdated things on my presentation. We always try to be up to date, but for that particular example, it is just a very interesting concept. Yeah. So what we're going to do? Well, first of all, I'm going to start the command line. Here we go. And question is, am I really a user? Yeah, so I would like to elevate, and as you see, when I do run as an administrator, then it asks me actually to provide a username and password. So I'm not here an administrator. Okay, great. So what will be the next step? The next step will be to verify if I'm able to run different types of scripts, all right? So that's going to be the flow. And I'm going to use the PowerShell to exploit that vulnerability because it's PowerShell, I mean, pretty much everybody can run that, yeah? So that's going to be the case study here. Okay, but first, before I explain, let me just show you the situation. I'll try to do elevate cmd ps1, and then it says it cannot be loaded because running script is disabled in the system. Okay, great. So I mean, looks fine. Not really. Of course, just to give you the concept, we can do get execution policy, and then it shows me restricted, which means I cannot run those scripts. Fine. But of course, that's not really true. Yeah. So I would like to run that script, but I'm going to do that in a very interesting way by bypassing that execution policy, and then we could say like, okay, but I mean, there are over 20 ways how you were able to bypass execution policy. Totally, absolutely, and the execution policy was never designed to really block something. It was more designed to prevent at the very beginning, at the first step, from running scripts that we don't know. So it's not really for users, it's more for administrators. But even so, even though we've got something like that, we are still able to bypass that, and I would like to show you how to do that. So what we're going to do, I would like to run this elevate.cmd because this gives me the possibility to exploit the vulnerability, and that exploits the 16443. So let me just show you the concept for that. So it's going to work like this. So we're going to do type elevate cmd dash, and then we're going to do PowerShell. Here we go. And then we're going to do no profile dash. Hopefully everything will work fine. Yep. And what happens underneath is that this particular machine, oh, let me see. Oh, okay. Core count 1, 2. Okay, 2 cores. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why it's like that. But let me just have a look in the whole situation, then I will spot the issue. So what's the situation over here? We can try to, of course, use this particular vulnerability. I wonder, maybe this is the configuration of my machine that I could be changing over here. Ah, maybe that's why. Okay, here we go. Yeah, we could restart and try to do it again. Yep, totally. So this is the flow. Yep, and then we could try to exploit that. So that particular vulnerability, what will allow me, and I will do that very quickly, is that it will basically allow me to become the local system, and that's quite cool. And this is the vulnerability that was in win32k.sys, and of course it's patched right now, but eventually what is important for you is to see how easy it is to actually exploit that, and that is something that we would like to dig into. Let's try it again. I mean, it's a good lesson at some point. I have a new virtual machine for that, so well, that's the reason, but that's going to be a quick boot, and then you will see how this is getting exploited. Fingers crossed. So another part that I would like to dig into after just we finish this, we're going to get into some misconfiguration of the servers to show you how easy is to extract different types of information from the servers area. Yeah? So if you have for example, IIS as one of the examples, how IIS maintains different types of secrets for itself, and how we are able easily to extract those secrets. So let's try to do that. Very good. Okay, fine. So we're gonna just try to start this command prompt again. And we're gonna get to CQ tools, and we're gonna type elevate. Oh, I know why. It could be because I was in a PowerShell, but this could be another option. Okay, so I mean, at least we could do that. PowerShell. And then no profile dash. Let's try to do this part. And hopefully the script will run. So right now I'm in the, yeah, here we go. Yeah, perfect. That worked. Lovely, lovely. Okay, it's nice to mitigate that on the fly. And then eventually you can see that we are anti-authority system, and we were regular users in this part, and then we were able just to elevate just like that. Now, beautiful part of that is that what's wrong with the PS1 file? Well, nothing. Yeah, so everybody can run PowerShell, and well, question is, when will be the moment when there's going to be a big generation of a new malware coming in a PowerShell, and we can see that that trend is actually kicking in. Okay, guys, so that was just the first example. Yeah. Now, whenever we are thinking about that part, what will be the next idea or next type of a misconfiguration that we got within our operating system? So let's just sum it up very quickly. We were discussing, first of all, about the privileged access management and what kind of things you can get access to. Eventually, do we monitor what's the effective access of the user, and where does it come from? So do we know that a user can elevate maybe in such way, etc. So this is something that we need to think about. Who has access to what kind of areas in the operating system? And in this case, by the way, local system of course has access. I don't want to say everything because it's not really everything, but lots of areas within the operating system. And eventually, when that happens, what do we do next? Yes, so when that vulnerability is exploited, do we have some kind of an incident response plan? And that's also part of the vulnerability management. Yeah, so what will be our steps? So do we perform the memory dump? Like, what kind of tools do we use to gather evidence? How do we collect the disk dump? How do we analyze it later? And coming into the summary regarding the PowerShell part, whitelisting, all the different types of options and solutions that are allowing us to only run the code that we know. Yeah, so this is something that is worth having a look at. Now let's begin into different types of misconfiguration steps. So I would like to show you, and that's going to be on the example of the IIS, and it's a pretty nice example because within the IIS we can clearly see of where the credentials are stored, etc. So that's gonna be our part. So let me bring that into the field. Here we go, and the full screen. Lovely. So what's going to be the flow? The flow is that basically when we get into IIS, this is regarding the different areas where the data can be stored, and this is something not to miss while managing vulnerabilities. So we're going to get into our application pools, and very simple, and let's start from the very beginning over here. We've got like a www.test.com. Yeah, so every single time we just do right-click advanced settings, we do configure a user over here for the identity for the user. We can set, and then you specify, of course, the password that should go somewhere. Yeah, and the question is, of course, where does this password go? Because we are saving it somewhere, and how does it go? So this is something that I would like to show you. Okay, so we're gonna look at this from a little different perspective, and I'm gonna maybe minimize it a little bit. Here we go. Just one more thing. Machine is coming back. Is it this one that got minimized that much? Oh, wow, that was too big. Okay, no. Yeah, let's just do that. Okay, that's perfect. So, yeah, so we've got www.test.com, and what we're going to do? Well, basically, we're going to, start monitoring over here with the process monitor. Now, I do have different types of filters. So the only filter that is interesting for me, real, it's this. Category is right. And I also filter out a couple of things that I don't need. So let's just use this part. Okay. And I'm going to start capturing. To verify is if there is any type of a place where I'm able to change the configuration of that user, and how does it reflect the drive. Okay, so let's just put the password like this. Perfect. So that gets saved somewhere, and the question is, of course, where that will be. And what are we filtering out over here? Yeah, so here we are filtering out all the different types of things like system, for example. So the question is how we are writing up all the things. Yeah, so we can do reset eventually, and we can simplify it, and then we can say that category is simply speaking right. Add, fine. Yep. Apply, that's the real monitoring happening right now. We can stop it. Yeah, and the question will be who really and where saves that information. Yes, so okay, perfect. So please guys have a look. Of course it's going to be non-IIS, we can guess that, but IIS where, and over here you are able to see that we are actually storing that configuration detail into, and we've got like a shared configuration configured into a certain type of a machine. C$ Windows System 32 inet SRV config application host config. Nice. So we can get there. Now, what I need to explain is that what is important for us is to understand how that part works. Because here we have a reference that inet manager is creating a file into C program data Microsoft Crypto RSA machine keys. What does it mean? It means that the secrets of that particular machine, they depend on the machine itself, on the computer account, so to say. So that's great because it means that every person having a privileged access to that machine is able to read that part. Yes, so is able to read any types of secrets like that, and that's something, by the way, that we need to understand. So that's why privileged access management is crucial in the organization, because when we store that kind of data, a lot of people can, for example, read that secret. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, this part is easy, as I mentioned, so let's just do that very quickly, and then we're going to go into the next demonstration. So first of all, we need to get into Windows, System32, iNet SRV, and then we're going to get into config, yeah, and then we got notepad, application host config, thank you, and then we're going to search for the www.test.com, fine. So over here, we're able to see the configuration of the application pool, and here we were, of course, saving the RSA keys, blah, 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 but it's just a folder, by the way, and here we've got the name of the provider. That's one of the providers within the IIS, and this one says IIS Windows Activation Service, which is for real Windows Process Activation Service, only AS provider. AS means symmetric cryptography. So question is, where's the key that will allow us to decrypt this guy over here? And the answer to that question is very straightforward. It's over here. That's this key within the machine key. So that key we use to decrypt that value. This was in Notepad over here. Yeah. Now, how do we do that without really building all the advanced tools, etc.? Well, we just ask the service itself. So we do appcmd, like you see. We do list app pool www test.com text, and then we specify asterisk, it's a built-in tool, by the way, so that we are extracting full information about that application pool. So appcmd list app pool www.test.com/text, and if we just do go up over here, that's this part of the misconfiguration that I'm talking about. Yeah, so sometimes we could be perfectly up to date, but it might be a matter of dependencies, different references in between solutions, etc., and we could end up with something like that. So this is something that I wanted to show you over here. Okay, guys, so what's next? Next is, and IIS, it's a very good example because it's very grateful if it's about the information extraction. I'm not saying it's bad, it's actually amazing, but we need to be aware that that kind of information can be extracted. So another part will be related with well, connection strings is easy because it's going to be in a clear text. But what I'm saying over here is the centralized certificates. So centralized certificates allow us to get access to, well, certificates in a central location. Surprise, surprise. And what we can do, we can go into Edit Feature Settings. And over here, you're able to see that we've got a username configured and the password. By the way, if you are interested in that setting, and that's kind of cool, you can spot that we've got 3 certificates, 3 PFX files, but there's only 1 password for the private key. Now think about it for a second. What does it mean? Yeah, so I can tell you that it means one very ugly thing, that, and then again, it depends how you manage this, but it means that that particular password needs to be the same for the private key for all of these PFXs, but what you get, it's a very nice central management so that you can get into the explore location area, and then pretty much you can just update them in place. It's great for lots of different types of situations where you have lots of certificates, lots of websites, HTTPS websites, etc. Plus, this is also very nicely supporting the server name indication in the IIS. Just an offside comment for that. Okay, anyway, it's not that bad. It's just that we need to be aware of this. Okay, guys, so what we're going to do, that's the plan. What we're going to do is to, again, change the password. We're going to leverage Procmon for that. So I'm going to use Control X, yeah, to clear it out and also start filtering. And within the IIS part, we're going to get into Edit Feature Settings part. And now I'm going to change something here. So I'm going to just choose password 1. Let's just do that. Oh no, once again, they don't match. Okay. Oh, come on. Yep, here we go. Perfect, sorry about this. And fine, so we have saved that password somehow. And the question is, did we register that? Yeah. So yeah, we did. And as you see, we've got program data, again, crypto, RSA machine keys. So this is what is engaged. And as well, by the way, we have engaged here registry. And that's super not common for IIS. IIS usually stores data in the configuration files, not in the registry, but this time it does. So what will be the next step is to extract it. So let me do it. We're going to go to password, right click, and we're going to go jump to. Lovely. And what you see over here is that I get a password like here, and that sounds like base 64. Eventually I can tell you that it's not really base 60, well it is base 64, but underneath it's not, and we're going to get there of course. But that's the way how it's the most comfortable way of storing that kind of a data. And so another type of a misconfiguration maybe, or maybe not, which is worth knowing that it exists so that you can manage that on the top of everything. Okay, so we've got this part. Now, how are we going to extract this? Yeah, so we learned over here that it's just like we've got the program data, Microsoft crypto machine keys. Yep, so data protection API for the machine is engaged, also affecting the registry. So knowing, by the way, that there is most probably the RSA provider, which we can, by the way, get if I do filter out and don't display only the right possibility, but also read. But that's fine. You can just trust me on this one. It's just going to be lots of searches. Fine. Yeah. So what we can do, we can refer to that and eventually use that in the script. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the provider which is called System Security Cryptography RSA Crypto Service Provider, and I'm going to leverage the IIS keys for encryption. So the one, once again, that we use and say it over here, so program data, Microsoft Crypto, RSA machine key. So I'm going to use this part. And then the next step is going to be related with, of course, well, extracting that particular key from the IIS. So let's do it. We're not ready yet for using the script, but we need to perform something that most of the administrators, by the way, forgot to perform while they're performing the backup of the IIS. So let's do it. So we're going to get into Windows. We're going to go to Microsoft.NET. We're going to go to Framework 64. We're going to go to the version of Framework, and all of that for one simple tool, which is called ASP.NET _ just type it reg IIS, this one. Yeah, so it's a very nice tool that has lots of options that are technically allowing us well, to install ASP.NET, etc., but also things like extraction of the keys. Yeah, so let me show you how that part works. Here we go. So we can, for example, encrypt the configuration section, etc. So there are plenty of those, but what we're going to focus on is this PX. Yeah, so here we can export an RSA key pair to the XML file, and we're going to use the option pri to include the private keys. So let's do that part, and we're going to do it like this: ASP.NET. One more thing actually to cover here, like if we get into PX, it asks us to provide container and the file, and that's really what we need to have over here. So container, what is this? A container is like a logical area within the IIS where the keys are. And you might be wondering why IIS has such a thing. Well, sometimes it's easy for developers to refer to those. So let's just don't comment on that. Let's just use it. Of course, I'm happy to explain. But IIS has a bunch of containers where it stores the keys. So sometimes it's easier to refer to a container rather than or instead of referring to the key directly on. That's my point. So hopefully that explains. So we've got ASP.NET reg IIS, and then we're going to put the container, and the container is IIS Windows Activation Service key, and here we are specifying the place, so tests.xml, for example, where the keys should be extracted with the option -pri to get the private keys. Where is the where's the case? Oh, -px, of course. I'm already assuming that ASP network guys know that we want to export the private key. And as you see, succeeded. So this is test.xml. So what we're going to do is do notepad, test.xml, enter, and this is, by the way, how it looks like. Yeah, so not a biggie, but these are the keys. This is the key that we're going to use to decrypt that secret. Okay, so what's the next step? Next step is the PowerShell. So we're going to go over here, and first of all, we've got our test.xml, and we are on a C drive, lovely. We're going to use, for that reason, the provider, RSA Crypto Service Provider, bank. Okay, and then we're going to, of course, use that within the key, or use the key within the provider. So that's perfect. Now, we're going to read the value in the registry, and that's this value which looks like base 64. And what we're going to do, we're going to convert that value, we've got it in a pass 64, from the base 64 string, as you see, and we're going to convert it into the byte array. Why like that? Before I explain, let me just do one more thing, and then I'm going to get back to the explanation. Now, another part that just for you to see, because I believe you're absolutely curious, what we're going to do, we're going to decode here that value from the registry from base 64 string to the regular text. And for that reason, I'm using Unicode. I mean, we could use anything really, but as you can see, we've got something like that. It's still a value that is encrypted out there. Yeah. So second part, and this is something that I said I'm going to be back to, is really related with having that in the byte array. And the reason why we're doing this is because in Windows, when you are analyzing things, that's not really vulnerability, it's a thing. Things are getting encrypted from right to left or left to right, or written to, I'm referring to the little endian and big endian. So in Windows, there is no like a standard for that. So when you are decrypting things, you always need to remember to have that in mind. So you're going to do it one way or the other way, yeah? And that's a little annoying when you're doing the research, but eventually that is really the reason why I did that kind of operation, so that I'm converting this to the byte array, so that later I can reverse it, yeah? That's really the reason. Here we go. And reverse, and then eventually I'm able to decrypt by using the key and the value and the provider of what is the password out there. Yeah? And as you see, the password is password, and that's something that comes out in a clear text. Yeah. So what we need to remember is that while we perform, of course, different types of vulnerability scanning, vulnerability analysis, etc., there might be things sometimes as well that we might not notice. So it's a very important process, but at some point might not be or will be enough for the whole organization, and it needs to be always supplemented with some kind of a review. Yeah. Now, what are the other things that we're having a look at that are priorities within the organization? Yeah. So things like well, maintaining Windows credentials. Yes, when we are looking at the Windows as an operating system, that is also something to do the touch base on. Of course, we are talking here about things like Mimikatz, extracting credentials in a clear text, extracting Kerberos tickets, etc. And for that, Windows 10 has a very nice protection, which is called VSM, or isolated user mode, which you can implement, or credential guard, putting this directly, which you can implement by having a secure boot, enabling this in a group policy, and technically having a TPM, rebooting, and then this allows us to be working within the virtual environment as well, which unfortunately it only supports Hyper-V for that. Yeah, so you need to be aware of that, and that is actually we could call it, I think, a vulnerability, because Windows had that vulnerability for the past 20 years, and right now it's actually patched with that. So that's why we are putting this on the spot. Now, the last thing, which is related with the PowerShell, I already showed you today an exploitation of the vulnerability with the PowerShell. That needs to be managed. It's a different angle, but we need to be absolutely great in it, because that is the time that is coming right now, and there's different types of modules which you could use within the PowerShell to also help yourself with that process of vulnerability management. Things like Power Forensics, access control. It's a very nice module, by the way, which allows you to audit different types of permissions to objects in Active Directory. Yeah? So purely supporting the security review process, and that's something that is worth having a look at. And at the very, very end, of course, testing yourself wherever you can. So perform, of course, that vulnerability management and assessment activities find out what's out there, what's eventually wrong, and implement that process that we were talking about of the discovery, of course, and eventually well, mitigating that process, and at the end performing the prioritization and performing the resolution or the conclusion, the response, yes, of what's going on. So the discovery, reporting, prioritization, and response to be used within the, whether you're going to use some software or you're going to do it by yourself. These are the things that are worth having a look at within their organization. Now, I can tell you that there's lots of different types of situations where there are different devices as well, and that's what you're also going to hear about, where they can be not up to date and nobody really cares about them, but they could be a very nice point of entry within the infrastructure. So that's why vulnerability management is an absolutely important process. Anyway, so hopefully it was interesting. I showed you a different angle from the vulnerability management perspective, a little bit technical as well, a little bit less technical than usual. As you remember, my presentations are always hardcore technical. This time we had a chat about vulnerabilities management and the threat modeling within the organization. Now, if you are interested in more details, please do have a look at our website, which is secureacademy.com. This is our educational part of our team where we share of what we know. So no registration, as I mentioned already, so please do enjoy it. And now I'm giving the stage to Beyond Trust, where you're going to hear from Jerome very, very cool things about the Retina, an absolutely amazing software for vulnerability management.
All right. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for hanging in there and listening and participating. My name is Jerome Diggs, as Paula mentioned. I'm actually going to walk through a few slides, again, just to set the foundation for our solution around vulnerability management. We'll walk through a quick architecture slide, talk a little bit about that and some of the capabilities of the solution, and then we'll actually walk through kind of a demo of the solution. We'll talk to some of the points that Paula actually went through as well during her presentation. That being said, we're going to talk a little bit about our Retina vulnerability management solution, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the other capabilities, which kind of speak directly and somewhat indirectly to some of the topics that Paula went through. Beyond Insight, which is the IT risk management platform that our Retina solution, vulnerability management solution sits on, also has additional core capabilities or core competencies related to it, more around the privileged account management. So a couple of things that Paula has spoken on around service accounts, localized users with potentially with weak passwords, accounts that may have more privileges than they need to. Really, that's where our Power Broker solution looks at, right? So privilege management or least privilege management, so adhering to a least privilege model on the desktop and the servers, being able to accommodate scenarios where you can elevate the applications that a user may need to use or commands that they need to run on Windows, on Mac, or in the Unix and Linux operating systems. Privileged password management, again, giving you the ability to determine whether or not which accounts you want that are considered privileged. You think of domain administrator, server administrators, even desktop administrators, accounts that are keys to the kingdom that should be guarded, being able to rotate those passwords out, making sure they're complex, making sure that they change on a regular basis. And then, of course, our auditing and protection, auditing Active Directory, our AD Bridge, being able to take non-Windows systems, think Unix and Linux, and then allow them to authenticate to Active Directory, right? Reducing the attack surface, if you will, and the proliferation of identities or accounts that are localized to those Unix or Linux boxes, being able to bridge those into Active Directory. And then, of course, what we're here really to focus on today is around our Retina vulnerability management. And again, enterprise vulnerability management, looking at that low-hanging fruit that attackers typically go after, shoring up your network and making sure that those vulnerabilities are at least made aware of and mitigated, so you can actually move on to other things as well. That being said, Beyond Insight is our risk management platform, which gives us the centralized reporting. There are actually over 280 reports out of the box with this solution. We'll actually take a look at just a few of them. Asset discovery, again, as Paula mentioned, being able to discover the systems out there, to at least understand what your network looks like, what the things that you don't know that are out there. Asset profiling, again, being able to understand on a system what local accounts exist out there. Are there accounts that we should be managing? Are there accounts that are outside of our purview? So being able to profile the system and look for things, additional things like services, processes, ports, and being able to react to those types of things. This is also where we're going to do our third-party integration, integrating with SIM solutions, ticketing systems, and other systems that are really a complete picture of that vulnerability management paradigm, if you will. Diving just a little bit deeper, and we'll actually jump out of the slideware. But Beyond Insight, again, is that risk management platform. From there, we actually have our Retina Network Security Scanner, or scanners that can be deployed across the enterprise that can be centrally managed by this Beyond Insight management console. This is the part of the solution that's going to go out there and scan the vast majority of your network, your routers, your switches, servers, desktops, anything basically with an IP address, and interrogate the system and profile the system and look for various things like processes and services, user accounts and things of that nature, and then of course vulnerabilities that exist on those systems, whether they're obtained through an authenticated scan or a non-authenticated scan. We also have a host-based component that can be deployed out there as well, and this can be installed on various systems to do host-based scanning. So you think of your workforce, and you may have users who are mobile. They may have laptops. You think of a sales staff or anyone who is on the road quite a bit, your road warriors, and being able to identify and understand what vulnerabilities exist on their systems, and also have that data come back into our Beyond Insight management console, whether via them connecting in via VPN, back in the corporate network, reverse proxy, or what have you. We can also accommodate those scenarios and have that additional data. As I mentioned earlier, we have our integration with various third-party connectors, next-gen firewalls, SIM solutions, ticketing systems, threat management solutions and platforms, and then of course our integration with our own solutions. You think of our least privileged solutions around Windows, Mac, and Unix and Linux, and then of course our password vaulting and session management solution, PowerBroker Password Safe. All right, so that being said, we'll actually jump into Beyond Insight, which is our risk management platform. And from here, this is all context aware, so it'll determine what the user has access to, which features, if you will, the user has access to. But we're going to start actually with the analytics and reporting aspect. So in here, as I mentioned earlier, we actually have over 280 reports built into the solution out of the box. And a couple of things that caught my ear when Paula went through her presentation is, again, when you think of VMS or vulnerability management solution, you're thinking of risk prioritization, right? Going out there and scanning your systems and then putting some context around the data that comes back, right? Understanding the risk, right? Where are my riskiest assets, right? What types of vulnerabilities exist on those particular systems, right? What are ways that I can get this information to my systems engineers or administrators so that they can actually quickly digest the information and then react to it and get those systems patched efficiently. And so there are a number of reports built in. We're going to go to view all reports, and we're going to go down to this vulnerability management category. And within here, we will see there is a category called risk. And we actually have risk broken out or pivoted in a number of ways. We'll look at risk matrix by vulnerability. And this will actually create a heat map for us. On the left-hand side, with many of these reports, we can actually select the parameters that we're interested in viewing. Actually, I already have a saved view. So I have my risk matrix vulnerabilities previous month. And I'm going to simply display that information. So my parameters are already filled out. and it's just basically going to load the report, and we actually have a heat map that comes back, which shows us the impact of the vulnerability, so the informational low, medium, and high severity levels in the risk, right? So how can this particular vulnerability be exploited, right? Whether it's a local privileged or remote unprivileged type of vulnerability. In here, we actually have 116 vulnerabilities from the previous month. Of that 116, 22 actually have known exploits, right? So again, putting that context around it. Not only are they the most risky of types of vulnerabilities, but also, again, additional context. Here are the vulnerabilities that are in that that exploitable category, right? So we can look at the details of the vulnerability, right? So I can go to any one of these and drill down and look at the details of the vulnerability, right? So the exploits, the CVE ID, that points me to the exploit, any reference information, and then of course fix information. In this case, it's rather simple. Just apply a knowledge base, a patch basically, to resolve that particular vulnerability. Right, I can drop back into the previous screen here and kind of follow the breadcrumbs, and I can go back into here and then look at, you know, which systems out there actually have that vulnerability. So I can go ahead and click on the asset or the asset count. It'll give me a list of systems. In this case, it's only one, my particular environment. And then I can actually look at the system itself and look at the details that were brought back or discovered about that system. Things like what software is installed on this system, right? What ports were found open, right? So here's my software, find the next reference. Right, what services are running on that particular system? Again, important information. One of the things Paula talked about, which again piqued my interest, was, you know, making sure we're adhering to best practices. Are the services running on this particular system that really shouldn't be? Are there shares that are open on that system? Right, putting context around the system itself as well. What ports are found open and running? And we'll actually see in a few minutes here. When we look at the back end, we can actually set up some alerting around things. Things as, you know, if non-standard ports are found open on particular systems, we can actually be alerted around those types of configuration-related concerns, if you will. Another aspect of the solution is around threat analyzers. Again, putting context around the system itself or around the vulnerabilities that were identified within the actual systems. In here, we actually have the ability to look at, holistically look at our enterprise. So I actually have on the left-hand side some parameters I can select. So do I want to look at specific systems, right? So I have this right here. Do I want to look at specific systems out there in my network, right, that I've scanned? Am I looking at specific audits? So I'm looking for a specific group of audits that are related to these particular systems. Am I looking for vulnerabilities with known exploits? Am I looking for vulnerabilities with known exploits? Well, the exploits are part of a malware toolkit or exploit toolkit, right? Again, putting context out there to help me quickly identify and understand what vulnerabilities that get placed into the highest of categories. I can then drill in. So these are basically, think of them as logical groupings of assets within my organization. These are user defined, so I can break these out by cost center, by VLAN, by Active Directory OU structure from an AD shop, by platform, Windows, Unix, Linux, network devices. Again, you know, it's customer definable, but again, the whole idea is putting context. I can then drill in to any particular category. So for this part of my network, I can run these kind of what-if scenarios. If I could fix the top 30, 40, 50 things within that part of my organization, that's going to lower the asset risk, in this case, going from 20 to 30 by 71%. It's going to lower the vulnerability count by roughly just over half across these 32 assets. I can look at the risk reduction worksheet, and then I'll actually break out what are those top 30 things, right? So again, if I'm an engineer who's tasked with going out and remediating these vulnerabilities, this gives me some great information to help me quickly identify what I should focus my energy on and how is it going to effectively reduce the risk associated with the assets that I currently own within the organization. I can drill in a little bit deeper and look at the audit details. All right, and get a description of the audit and look at, so as I can see this one requires some authentication, so this was a part of an authenticated scan, and drill in deeper and deeper, right? So, again, putting context around the data set that we actually are collecting out there. The other piece, of course, is putting in or giving you the ability to have something to respond to in terms of, how are we tracking, if you will, over time. So I can look at things like SLA breakdown, right? So I want to start to measure my my efforts out there. I'm going out there, I'm identifying these vulnerabilities, and I want to measure my efforts. How am I doing in terms of remediating them, right? Am I meeting my SLAs? And you can define what those SLAs are. You can define which groups of systems that you want to target for an SLA, because each group of systems, a DMZ might be different than a dev environment, that might be different than a production environment. So you can logically break these assets out, however you need to define them, the rounds, if you will, and then whatever SLAs that need to be met for those particular parts of your organization, right? So I can see, of course, there's lots of red, as you can imagine, in a lab environment, but I can also see there's some green sections, and I can actually look at, so these are ones that are within an SLA that are currently open or that are still open. We can see which ones that were SLA that was met, this lighter green color, and they were actually fixed. We can actually see which ones that were in the SLA not met and they're currently open, and which ones that might not have hit the SLA time frame, but they were actually fixed, right? So we might have missed that SLA window, but we actually did go out and fix them. And so we can actually drill into any one of the sections on this particular graphic and look at the details, which systems are associated with that particular part of the graphic, other known exploits, the average age of the vulnerabilities in days. All right, so we can actually see what the average age that we collected on those particular systems. And we can see in this case, of course, these are low severity. They're well outside the 60-day window that I selected. So there's some work that has to be done to go out and remediate those and make sure that we're going out there in a timely fashion. Again, context. We're putting in context around the data that we're collecting, so you can make the correct decisions around how to remediate those and where to remediate those particular vulnerabilities. Last report, but not least, is vulnerability delta by month, another report type. And again, there are literally hundreds of reports that are built in, and we're just trying to give you a good sampling of the various types of reports, but this is going to give you trends over time, right? So in this case, I'm looking at from the previous year to this month. We can see at the bottom what's been added, any new vulnerabilities that we've identified, anything that's removed or remediated, and anything that's existing. So over time, these things, there are vulnerabilities that may still exist out there. The great part about this solution is you can actually go deeper into the actual data set that makes the mini graphic. So I want to go to the next page here, and I can see, I can drill into the details on any given month. In this case, I'm looking at the 47 added vulnerabilities. I can see which systems they belong to. Are there any known exploits? Again, drilling in, I can look at the details of the vulnerabilities themselves. All right, so I can still get down to the actual details of the vulnerabilities themselves as well. Switching gears a little bit, we also talked a little bit about this discovery piece, right? So it's not only just vulnerability, but it's also kind of situational awareness in terms of the configuration, right? When we go out there and we discover a system, we also pull back additional details about the system. We look at things like what processes were running on that system when we scanned it. All right, and we actually capture the hash of those processes as well. We can run it against things like VirusTotal and look to see if there's anything that's potential malware on that system. We look at a list of services. We look at the context of the service. What account is it running as? As I mentioned earlier, we actually have a whole different solution or a whole integrated solution called PowerBroker Password Safe, where we can actually manage those service accounts. And we can actually make sure that they're complex, that their passwords change on a regular basis, We can go out there and also restart services if need be when the password change does occur on the underlying account. We can do the same thing for scheduled tasks. We capture and pull back a list of local users or users on that system. And important information as well is the password set to expire? Right? Are there any potential accounts that shouldn't be on there? Are there any potential backdoor accounts that were created that we need to be made aware of? Now you couple that with our PowerBroker password safe solution, we can auto onboard those local accounts, right? So if we find the administrator account or some other account that's on that system, and we want to create a rule that says, hey, if this account exists on these systems, go ahead and pull that account into the vault. We're going to manage that account. We're going to make sure the password is a complex password. We're going to make sure that it changes, let's say every 30 days or every quarter or what have you. We can do that with our integration with our password safe solution as well. Again, same risk management platform, slightly different solution, but it all can be integrated into our risk management platform. The last piece I want to show is another scenario, and that is where we may have additional configurations that we discover out there and that we want to be alerted on. So one of the things Paula mentioned earlier was around services, and I believe the example she mentioned was the spooler service, right? So on a domain controller, you may not necessarily need to have that particular service running on that particular system. So what we can do is say if we find a service, in this case spooler, which is something we discovered on the system, and we find that in a series of systems, so I'm going to use an Active Directory query in this case. And I have a query that basically enumerates all the systems in my domain controller's OU. So if we match this criteria, if it's a domain controller and it's running the spooler service, I want the team, whoever that is, to be alerted when that scenario exists, right? So again, not only can we identify the scenario, but we can also set up things like alerts around poor configuration, if you will. I did something similar for restricted ports, where my domain controllers, if I find that there's an FTP port running, again, I may want to be alerted if that's the case. I can actually set up a smart rule that'll trigger when we find that scenario. Domain controllers, any system in this OU that's running, that has port 21 open running on it, we want to make sure that someone's made aware of that, and then they can actually correct that scenario. All right. So again, just quick ways to show you that within this solution, not only are we focused on vulnerability management, we also can look at things like configuration, weak configuration. We can also look at things like benchmarking, CIS benchmarks, U.S. government configuration baseline benchmarks, and so SCOT-related benchmarks are also a core capability of the solution itself. All right, that is it for the demo slash beyond trust component. I'll hand controls back over to Sarah.
Okay, thanks, Jerome. Okay, guys, so at this point, let's jump into our last poll, and then we have some Q&A that came in. So let me launch that poll. And at Beyond Trust, we'd love to help you guys with your privileged access management or your vulnerability management needs. If you would like to schedule a personalized one-on-one demo with a Beyond Trust security engineer, please select yes, let us know, and we will be in contact with you to schedule that personalized demo and have a conversation with you about your vulnerability management needs or even your PAM needs. I'm going to leave this up. Let's dive into a couple of questions. Jerome, let's see. These came in for you. So how quickly does Beyond Trust get MS Patch Tuesday information into Retina installations for up-to-date scanning and reporting?
Sure, great question. So our general rule of thumb, and before I answer that question, I'd interject and say that we actually have our Patch Tuesday webinar. It's the Wednesday after Patch Tuesday. But that being said, in terms of speed, we actually have an SLA for anything marked a critical vulnerability that will actually have an audit check within 48 hours of the vulnerability being identified and released. Now that being said, typically we actually have an audit substantially quicker than that. Sometimes it's within the same day. Sometimes it's within a 24-hour period. But our general SLA is within 48 hours. Now, one feature within our Beyond Insight solution is this feature called an audit manager. And basically what that allows you to do is it gives you visibility as an engineer or as an owner of the solution to say, hey, send me an email alert if there's anything that's considered based on risk, high, medium, low informational. If there are any new audits within the last X number of days that happen to come in within the system, right? So you can actually be alerted ahead of time before you actually do your scan as to what new audits are available, and then what may potentially will show up in your next scan of your systems.
Jerome, so what other ways does Beyond Trust provide assistance with misconfiguration, for example, insecure passwords on services?
Sure. So again, there are various audit checks that are built into the solution. Nothing necessarily around insecure passwords per se, but we do give you visibility as part of that discovery scan to find out look for any insecure accounts that may be running services, that may be local on that system that are not being managed, if you will. And then, of course, our password safe solution can help shore up your environment where you can actually leverage it to put those accounts under management, allow us or our system to rotate the passwords, making sure that they're complex. You can set your password policy, whether it's 20 characters or 30 characters or what have you, and making sure that they change on a regular basis. So there are ways we can help shore up, discover the accounts, and of course shore up and manage the account passwords going forward.
Jerome, does Beyond Trust integrate with pen testing tools?
We do, in a number of ways. We actually have direct integration with the Metasploit framework from Retina. We also can export our vulnerability data. There's an actual report called a vulnerability export report that can be digested into various pen tools.
Okay, and looks like the last question that we had come in, can one run SCAP scans against systems, CIS
For sure.
or CIS included?
Yes, that is correct. So we do have out of the box an SCAP engine built into this solution. That being said, there are numerous CIS benchmarks built in. There are numerous government-related benchmarks. You think of things like the U.S. Government Configuration Baseline, FDCC checks, and Microsoft best practice baselines are all built into the solution. And it's part of our normal regular maintenance as new benchmarks are published. We include those benchmarks into the solution as well.
All righty, we are done. Thanks for all the questions, you guys. We really appreciate it. A reminder that you will receive a follow-up email containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now, so be on the lookout for that follow-up. A big thanks to our experts today and to all who attended live. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Take care, everybody, and goodbye.